Meanwhile, in Russia, the president is on a charm offensive. Vladimir Putin is hosting the Russia-Africa Summit. The first edition was in the year 2019. It was held in Sochi. It is Russia's largest resort city. What's happening now is the second edition. The theme for this year is peace, security and development. And that's what's on the agenda. Growing cooperation, promises of deals, security guarantees, all with a sprinkle of geopolitics. The summit started with a bang. Putin's first promise was free grains to Africa.
We
will be ready in the next 3 to 4 months to provide for free to Burkina Faso, Zimbabwe, Mali, Somalia, Central African Republic, Eritrea, with 25 to 50,000 tons of grain, and we will ensure free delivery of these products to consumers.
Now some context here. Ukraine accounts for 9% of global wheat exports. This grain makes its way to markets through the Black Sea. In July 2022, Russia and Ukraine struck a deal. It was called the Black Sea Grain Deal. Ukrainian grain would reach the world and Russia would not attack the ships or stop them. That was the deal. But last week, Russia walked out of this deal. And since then, global food prices have been on the rise. Africa too was alarmed. The continent depends on much of this Ukrainian grain, and rising food prices do not bode well for its leaders. They could face protests or worse. So Putin is now making up for that. He's promising to cover up for Ukrainian grain, and he's offering some of it for free.
Our country can replace Ukrainian grain both commercially and as free aid to the poorest countries in Africa, especially as we are again expecting a record harvest this year.
But grain wasn't the only thing on the mind of African leaders. The other issue bothering them is the Wagner Group. We've told you about the coup, how their leader challenged Vladimir Putin and got himself exiled. Now the fighters are all over the place, but in Africa, Wagner has a considerable presence. They're seen as an extension of Moscow's influence. Africa relies heavily on the Wagner Group. They provide security in exchange of gold. So this will be an urgent issue for African countries. Countries like the Sudan, Mali, Libya, and the Central African Republic. And what does Russia have to say? Well, the same old. Wagner's work in Africa will continue as usual. But Moscow doesn't say who will be responsible for their actions. I guess that's up to Africa to figure out. There were also some promises of financial cooperation. Listen to this.
In order to further expand the entire range of trade and economic ties, it is important to move more energetically in financial settlements on trade transactions to national currencies, including the ruble.
So grain, security and money. That's what the summit focused on. But was that the real aim of this extravaganza? You see, Putin is isolated on the global stage. He waged a war last year, and since then, the West has shunned him. So he's looking for alternatives and pockets of support. He wants to exert his influence on Africa. And how will he do that? He cannot travel to Africa. There's an arrest warrant against him from the International Criminal Court. Flying down would be a risk. So Putin chose the second best alternative, which is inviting all of these leaders to Russia. In fact, it was a perfect opportunity for him to hold center stage before all these African leaders. But the guest list might be a dampener. Putin expected a full-packed auditorium. What he's got is a lot of empty seats. 49 African delegations were invited this year. Only 17 RSVP'd. It's a sharp fall from 2019 when 43 leaders visited Russia. And what explains this dwindling guest list? Moscow blames the West for it. It says Western nations tried to sabotage the event. I have the statement from the Kremlin spokesperson. And this is what he said. Virtually all African states have been subjected to unprecedented pressure from the US, and French embassies on the ground have not been sleeping either, along with their Western missions, who are also trying to do their bit to prevent this summit from taking place. So Moscow says African countries were subjected to unprecedented pressure. But is that really what's happening? The Ukraine war has divided the world. Countries were quick to choose sides. Africa did not. It has been mostly neutral. African countries did not want to get drawn into a Cold War-like situation. They wanted to avoid camp politics. Also look at Russia's footprint in the continent. It has a high profile, yes, but not enough investment to show for it. In 2019, Putin vowed to double bilateral trade within 5 years, but that's not happening. Trade is stalled at $18 billion per year. Foreign direct investment is abysmally low, and Russia doesn't offer much aid either. So while Putin's African dream promises may sound impressive, his USP is diminishing. There are other compelling dreamers in the mix, the likes of China, the United States and France. They're all vying for influence in Africa. And they're also pumping in a lot of money. Putin knows that a few favors here and there are crucial to secure trust. Thus the free grains. But will he be able to match up with investments in the long run? Will his promises hold up? Or will they just disappear like a mirage in the Sahara?